Okay, so that's pretty big class 2 prep, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this tooth definitely needs a crown. Okay, your class 2s were a little more conservative, so they didn't really need crowns, but we're going to do them anyway. But for right here, so let's check the occlusion. So obviously we need to reduce the A contacts, but again, I'm going to try to preserve the cusp bridge. And we do the basic movements the same as we always do for reducing the A plane. So we're getting enough clearance. So if we get about 3/4 millimeter clearance and preserve the cusp bridge, then we're in pretty good shape. Now the B plane, not going to be much work to do over here, is there? There's the angle, so direct vision as usual. Just cut straight through from the mesial marginal ridge all the way through the oblique ridge. So flat plane, not horizontal, but flat all the way across. So the same thing we usually do. And we can look up this way and we can get an idea how much clearance we're getting right now. I'm actually looking through the space created by the class 2, and I can see that I have plenty of clearance. And then, of course, we would normally find the distal pit and bring the groove up this way. That's just what you've been doing. Come right up like this, and then flip the handpiece over, and come up the same groove this way. So now we've got the B plane completely done. We've got a nice groove coming up there, and then the groove comes down to C plane here, and we do that the same as usual. Point the burr diagonally, make a nice groove, come up here, keep the burr pointing the same direction all the way around. We're going to finish it around the corner this way at about a 45-degree angle as it comes around the corners. We'll refine that later on. Okay, so we got plenty of clearance on the A plane, the B plane, the C planes, all the contacts are reduced. Okay, and of course you can use bite wax or bite registration material to double check on the B and the C planes over here in the functional cusp. Okay, so now we have these boxes and everything's undercut, as you'd expect for something that was done as a mechanically retained direct restoration. So we have no choice. We're going to have to make it draw. We're going to have to make it so that the facial angle walls of the box, and this is going to be the trickiest one right here.
Okay.
We need to make sure that those walls diverge occlusally. I want to see this wall at the same time, and this wall at the same time, and all these walls and all these walls at the same time. So right now we can't, so we're going to fix it. So for the onlay, we're going to typically use a tapered fissure burr, and the 170L is a great one.
170L.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's your 170L. Mm-hmm. Now, this particular Kilgore tooth is very, very soft. So that's why I don't have you using it. But I'll just illustrate what's going on, what we need to do to make these boxes draw and still be retentive and so forth. Notice that the gingival margin on the distal box is pretty much at the gingiva right now. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a little awkward because we're going to end up making a gingival bevel down there. Mm-hmm. Again, when we're doing gold crowns, we want the gold to be a small angle at the margins, and a gingival bevel is what we would typically do. All right, so let's just go ahead and recut the distal box. So I'm going to lean the burr toward the axis, and I'm also going to lean it facially. Now recut this whole corner with the burr leaning axially and facially. Axially and facially all the way down to the gingival floor. Hopefully I don't go any deeper gingivally than we already have. And then lean it axially as we come back along the axial wall, and then axially and lingually to recut this side. All the way down to the gingival floor. So now let's see what this looks like at this point. And again, we might have a patient where we're doing an onlay and the original boxes are quite undercut like this. So if I can look down here and see the facial lingual wall at the same time, then I know I've achieved some divergence, and I just have some divergence there. I think I'm going to taper a little bit more on the lingual side though. On the mesial box, of course, we know there's a lot of undercut here. If I were to get rid of the undercut by leaning the burr out this way, there'd be a lot of gold showing. So I'm going to not upright it quite that much, but I'm going to taper more on the lingual side so that we still have divergence facial lingually. So same thing I was just showing here. I'm going to lean the burr axially and lingually a little more. So the first step is to make sure we have boxes that draw. So on the distal side, the facial lingual walls diverge occlusally now. So let's do the same thing over here, but I'm not going to totally upright this facial wall. But again, I'm leaning the burr axially and a little bit facially, or a little bit closer to vertical maybe. I'm going to recut that corner and then come away from the wall. Now I'm going to lean the burr axially, and I'm going to lean it pretty much lingually here. And then recut this wall. So let's see how things are going so far. So I want to be looking down the facial wall here and see the lingual wall here, down the facial wall here and see the lingual wall here. Okay, pretty close. The taper of these two walls is about the same. I can see the lingual walls of both the boxes about equivalently. I can see the facial wall here, but I'm still getting an undercut on that facial wall there. Notice also that there's a lot of undermined enamel there. Okay, we're going to take care of that by extending a little bit more later. I think we're going to have to live with the fact that we've got more clearance here than we would normally like. And as I told you before, typically we're going to deal with that. If you really want to do a gold restoration for this patient, if it would show, if there's a margin that would show this much in the mesial buccal area, then we would maybe do the crown and have the gold stop here and then fill in this whole area with composite. As I said earlier, I've had that done in my mouth, and it's been in there for 35 years. So it's doing all right. I had the composite replaced once, but it didn't really need to be, as it turns out. Okay, so I'm seeing the lingual walls, I'm seeing the facial wall, I'm seeing the facial wall. Okay, make sure that we also can see the axial walls at the same time. So I want to be able to see the axial here and here at the same time. Initially they were pretty undercut. So again, lean the burr axially, and we can recut that wall all the way down to the gingival floor, but get a definite axial taper, and then an axial taper over here from one corner to the other. Okay, so again, the mesial and distal walls, since there's all this tooth structure in between, they need to converge occlusally, and the facial lingual walls need to diverge occlusally because there's nothing in between them. Okay, so let's go ahead and connect the isthmus from one wall to the other, but we're going to lean the burr facially when we do that.
Doc, one.
Okay, so let's do the facial part of the isthmus here. I'm going to lean the burr facially. So I'm looking so I can see that I'm leaning the burr facially, and then we'll do the lingual part leaning lingually. And we're going to recut this whole wall. We're connecting the corners of the boxes together with the whole wall leaning facially. Let's do the lingual. Then, as before, we'll check the draw, the divergence between the facial angle walls. So let's look down this way and see if the facial angle walls of the isthmus diverge occlusally. So I can see this wall and I can see this wall at the same time. I can see this wall and this wall, and I can see this wall and this wall. So I'm looking down the axis, I can see all those walls. Okay, now the next step, once we have boxes that draw, once we have walls that are tall enough so they're retentive, then we need to do the next thing, which is make sure that the gold at these margins is going to be a small angle. We want to have a small angle of gold at these margins. So we're going to do what's called flaring. We're going to basically take this angle and make it obtuse, so that when the gold comes around onto that flared area, it has a small angle. So that gives us more access to that margin, but it also makes it so that we can burnish the gold at that margin. Okay, that's a key step, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So lean the burr axially and facially, just like we did for the corner here, and then I'm going to start on the outside and cut from the outside in. I'm cutting toward my eye. Notice without the mirror you'd be lost. We're going to make a flare at the same vertical angle, and we're going to go all the way down to the gingival floor. The flare has to come all the way down to the gingival floor. So I've saved a little bit of a corner, but I've got a nice flare there. So the gold will be a small enough angle there so we can burnish the gold to the margins. And that's what gives us the best restoration. Okay, put the burr at this angle here. So the same angle we used before for the internal line angle, and then this one, we're going to cut toward our eye from the inside out. And we're going to make a nice big flare, and we're going to make it go all the way down to the gingival floor. So if the box walls are pretty tall, that's good because it's retentive, but we have to make sure that the flare goes all the way down and all the way down to the gingival floor. This side over here, we put the burr in the corner. Now this one, we're going to cut similarly from the inside out, away from our eye. So I want to get rid of the undermine enamel here. Obviously we're going to get tons of extensions. Okay, so this is the way these pre-prepared teeth are done, requiring a lot of extension. So again, if we make the gold like this, the angle is such that we can burnish it. Put the burr against this corner, and then here we're going to look from the outside in. We're going to cut from the outside in away from our eye at the same vertical angle that we used for the corner of the box. We're going to take that flare all the way down to the gingival floor. Now anytime we do partial coverage gold, I sort of lost that corner, didn't I? Mm-hmm. So I could come back and make the corner again if I wanted to at the same vertical angle just to find that corner. Okay, so we basically have a corner and a flare on each of these four corners. Okay, so we're learning how to do this. Again, if it were in a patient, we'd be very concerned about this area right here. You could think that one of the things you could do is do an onlay, do a gold onlay where gold is everywhere, except there's an open area here. The gold might come all the way to this margin, all the way down through the gingival, but there might be an open area that we fill with ceramic. So I've done inlays that have a mesial buccal ceramic inlay in the gold. And we could do the same thing here, or backfill it with composite the way we discussed earlier. All right, so now we have boxes that are retentive. They're tall. This one's going to be a little tricky to bevel the gingival, but I'll give that a try. And So, but we've got the corners, we've got the flares, we've got draw, we have retention. Now let's bevel the genital margin over here, and we're going to put the burr against the flare and cut gingerly right at the flare into the genital margin and then away from the flare toward the middle. This should sound like a very familiar technique to you.
For the composite.
Exactly. That's what we did for beveling the genital margin on the Class 2 composite. So again, come down the flare and then away from the flare toward the middle. I'm going to try to use just the tip of that burr to get the bevel across there. We can do a little more easily over here since we're a little bit farther from the gingiva. In a patient, we wouldn't worry as much about damaging the gingiva because, you know, it'll go back on a patient. It just doesn't tend to go back on the typodont. So I'm just creating a little bevel here, trying to stay slightly above the gingival margin. But again, we come down the flare into the genital margin and away from the flare toward the middle. Lean the burr as much as we can toward the axis. That'll give us a reasonable angle for that bevel. Okay, so I got something of a bevel all the way across there. We can, of course, bevel the axial pulpal line angle so there's nothing sharp internally. We're going to make a little bevel along the facial cusp ridge. We want the gold to come just a little bit over that facial cusp ridge. So I'm going to bevel that, but it's going to be a horizontal bevel. We were really careful to avoid cutting beyond that cusp ridge at the beginning. So now we're going to make just a little horizontal bevel along that cusp ridge. So the gold just barely sneaks over that cusp ridge. And then we're going to make sure that bevel joins the top of the flare by putting the burr parallel to the flare and bringing the bevel around that corner. And the same thing over here. Okay, so now we have a bevel that makes a smooth connection to the top of this flare, makes a smooth connection to the top of this flare. Gingival bevel makes a smooth connection to the bottom of both of those flares. This gingival bevel makes a smooth connection to the bottom of those flares. Now we need to finish the C-plane, and so we're going to finish it around the corner at a 45-degree angle like this, and the 45-degree angle like this. Typically we'd like to have the lingual margin fairly straight and horizontal all the way around that lingual surface, so we might just polish it a little bit. And then we're going to realize that the gold that comes over this cusp down to that margin, by the time the gold gets to this margin, it's pretty weak, it's pretty thin. So we want to increase the thickness of the gold near that lingual margin. So to do that, we're going to cut what's called an offset or a truss. You could call it whatever you want, a step or anything. We're just making a little step right here near that lingual margin. We're not touching the margin because the distance between the offset and the margin is the lingual bevel. We want to make sure we have a nice lingual bevel. The C-plane is actually the lingual bevel, but we're just putting the offset within the C-plane, and so we're reducing the basic size of that bevel, but we still have a nice bevel over there. Now we're going to bring the bevel into the top of the flare here, and into the top of the flare here with the burr parallel to the flare when we bring it around the corner. We lost this cusp as we made that offset, so that's okay because the gold in this area is still plenty thick enough to give us lots of strength at that margin. But over here, we made sure we got the offset made. This is a little bit of a sharp edge right here, just because of the way the tooth is, so I'm going to make sure there's nothing sharp here, just like we beveled the axial pulpal line angles. Okay, so that's the essence of the onlay. Make sure we can see all the walls in the mesial and all the walls in the distal at the same time. And then if I turn this way, Make sure I see all the walls in the facial and all the walls in the lingual at the same time. Make sure you have bevels everywhere. Make sure you have smooth continuous margins, 360 degrees all the way around. Make sure you have tall enough walls so that you have good retention. Make sure that you have enough clearance to be able to burnish the gold. Make sure you have a small angle of gold at the margins because you've flared out these angles so they're obtuse, more like a composite class 2. And this would be fine clinically. We just have to figure out how we want to deal with this mesial buccal area, but again, that's the way these teeth are made, so we're kind of stuck with something that's a little bit more challenging than it would be on a typical patient situation. So the cases that you have, the ones you're working on, your margins are much closer to the adjacent tooth, so you won't have so much to deal with when it comes to that, but we're going to do the preps exactly the same way as I just did this one.